Never apologize. The dark strategy that makes people respect you doesn't open with a handshake. It opens with a knife one held to your illusions. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Niccolo Machiavelli, you were taught that apologies show strength, that humility wins hearts, that to be respected, you must first be liked. Machiavelli would burn those lies. He'd call it performance. A social contract designed to chain lions in the court of sheep, because here's the truth. Every time you say, "I'm sorry," out of fear, not justice, you are lowering your mask, revealing weakness. And to the watching world, weakness is a signal, a wound, a map. They follow it. They use it. This isn't about morality. It's about strategy. Never apologize, not to fix perception, not to keep peace, not to win favor. Not unless it strengthens your control. Silence, not surrender, is your shield. Power is not found in being understood. It is found in being unreadable. The question is not, should I apologize? The question is, what am I trading my power for? You weren't born apologizing. You were trained to offer your power in exchange for peace. Trained to speak the word sorry like a spell, hoping it would keep the wolves at bay. But wolves don't retreat when you show your throat. They circle closer. This is the first lie you must unlearn. That apology is strength, that it proves integrity, that it makes you noble to Machiavelli. This was never mercy, it was miscalculation. Apologies, when given freely, are currency. And like any currency, they lose value with overuse. Say sorry too often, and soon no one hears it. Worse, they smell blood in it. Because in the architecture of power, language is architecture. And sorry is a word shaped like a bow. You think you're disarming tension, but what you're really doing is disarming yourself. Machiavelli understood that people do not forgive weakness. They forgive when it suits them. They forgive when it serves them, not when you beg, not when you bleed, not when you confess. A man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good. He wrote that with fire in his hand and silence in his heart. Apology, he knew, had a cost. Because most people don't want your repentance. They want your submission. Think back. How many apologies were for survival, not sincerity? How many times did you kneel before someone who already decided not to understand you? You thought you were being honorable, but you were just negotiating with a storm, and storms don't forgive, they pass. Now listen carefully. There is a moment, a very specific moment, when someone feels threatened by your strength. It might be your words, your presence, your clarity. And instead of confronting that truth, they ask for your apology, not to heal, to bend you. And if you comply, you reinforce their power. You tell them, yes, I will be small for you. I will twist myself to fit your approval. They smile, they move on. And you feel hollow because you are. This is not about arrogance. This is not about cruelty. It is about clarity. Apologize only when it restores power, not when it costs it. Do not kneel out of habit. Do not hand out confessions like spare change. Do not offer your guilt as a gift to the unworthy. And most of all, do not apologize to be liked. Machiavelli never sought love, he engineered leverage. He understood that being loved is a luxury. Being respected is survival in the cold theater of strategy. Every action is calculated. Your apology must be no different. It must be deliberate, sharp, rare, because when sorry becomes your default, you are no longer communicating. You are bleeding out. You'll apologize for taking up space, for speaking your mind, for enforcing a boundary, for saying no, and the more you do it, the more they expect it. You've taught them to anticipate your submission. They don't even need to ask anymore. Understand this. You are being conditioned to self-erasure, not by tyrants, but by the culture of performance. This world is a stage, and the most rewarded actor is the one who looks the most remorseful. But Machiavelli would burn that stage to him. There was no virtue in looking good, only in being untouchable. So, the next time you feel that familiar instinct rising, that need to explain yourself, to make it right, to be the better person, ask one question: who benefits from this apology? If it's not you, then it's a transaction, and you're paying with your spine. Let others speak for forgiveness. Let them bow, let them beg, let them perform. You move in silence. You reclaim the word sorry as a weapon, not a wound, because the one who apologizes from fear is the one who has already surrendered. Asterisk. They want a response. That's the trap. They don't want resolution. They want a reaction. Proof that you felt the sting. Proof that they struck something soft. Because once you react, they know the knife reached the bone, and now they know where to twist next time. But silence. Silence is not passive. Silence is a blade hidden in the folds of velvet, still controlled, unreadable to Machiavelli. Silence was often louder than action, a form of war, a strategy wrapped in stillness. When you say nothing, they start imagining everything. They replay their words. They second-guess their tone. They wonder, did I go too far? Did they see through me? Are they planning something? Silence plants seeds in the mind of your opponent, but it waters none. You withdraw not in weakness, but in the way a king closes the gates of his castle at dusk, not to flee, but to prepare. Let's speak plainly. When someone accuses you, insults you, betrays you, they expect a defense, an explosion, a plea, a breakdown, something, and if you give it, you hand them the script. They control the narrative. You've entered their stage. But when you say nothing, you remove yourself from the performance entirely. You leave them there speaking lines to an empty theater, and now they are the only one being watched. This is the reversal, the mirror turned back on them. Their words echo against silence, and the silence reveals them. Machiavelli understood this power. He didn't just rule with armies, he ruled with absence. A prince who speaks too much loses mystery. A prince who responds to every slight loses altitude. Royalty does not argue with peasants. It does not descend into the mud. It does not rush to clarify or correct, because once you lower your height to be understood, you are no longer above them. You are among them. The world today feeds on visibility. It demands explanation. Justify your silence. Explain your delay. Apologize for your pause. But to Machiavelli, every word not said was a chess move. Every delay, a message. Every withdrawal, a repositioning of power. Because silence does not mean absence. It means calculation. Think of a general in retreat. To the untrained eye, it looks like surrender, but to the strategist, it's bait. The enemy chases shadows, and in the fog, they lose themselves. Silence is the fog you create. Let them walk into it. Let them become unsure of where you stand, because when people don't know what you're thinking, they'll fill the space with their own insecurities. They will argue with themselves, fight with ghosts, panic at the quiet, and now you're not just withholding response, you're controlling the tempo of their mending relationships. Silence can collapse a manipulator. They're not equipped to fight without a mirror. They provoke to see what lives inside you, but when the mirror shows nothing, they see themselves, and they don't like what they find in public life. Silence reframes scandal. Let the crowd scream. Let them demand your reaction and wait. If you speak, you anchor yourself to their storm. If you don't, the storm burns out. People move on. The narrative dissolves. Without fuel, Machiavelli would never chase the mob with explanations. He knew the crowd is not loyal. Only power is respected. Only mystery is feared. You are not here to explain your every move. You are not here to make others comfortable with your silence. You are here to observe, to wait, and to strike when the advantage is absolute. When you do finally speak, after the silence has done its damage, your words carry weight. They are not noise, they are signal. They are fire dropped in a dry forest. This is how silence becomes exponential, because every moment you wait, the tension grows, and when the dam finally breaks, it shatters. But here is the mistake most people make. They confuse silence with avoidance, with passivity, with fear. But true silence, strategic silence, is present without exposure. It's the sword hidden beneath the robe, the monarch behind the veilet. It's not that you have nothing to say, it's that you choose not to say it, because the moment hasn't earned it yet. And when others finally realize that you could have spoken, but didn't, that's when respect begins, because power is never loud, it's never desperate, it doesn't need to be understood. Machiavelli never asked for understanding, he demanded results. He believed a ruler must be a lion and a fox, but the fox never roars, it waits, it calculates, and it survives. So let them write their stories. Let them tell the world who they think you are. Let them shout into the void. Trying to pull a word from your mouth, you remain still, because stillness is the throne, and the one who does not respond controls the meaning. That is the law. Never react to prove you're alive. React only to prove they were wrong to touch you. And until then, you say nothing, because the most powerful presence is the one no one can read but everyone watches. Asterisk. You feel guilty, and you think that means you're wrong. You think guilt is a sign of your conscience, of your goodness, of your humanity, but that's the illusion. Guilt is not truth. It is not a compass. It is not the voice of morality whispering in your ear. Guilt is a signal, and like all signals, it can be forged, projected, manufactured. Sometimes it rises from within, but more often, it is planted. Someone around you wanted control, so they reached for the oldest tool in the human arsenal. Not logic, not violence. Guilt, because guilt doesn't have to be loud to work. It only has to sit inside you long enough for you to doubt yourself, and the moment you begin to doubt, they've already won. This is the hidden economy of control. Not chains, not threats, but the slow erosion of your certainty, your fire, your right to stand tall without explanation. Machiavelli would not absorb guilt. He would trace its source. He would study the hands that built it, and he would ask one question, cold, clear, final: who benefits from your guilt? That's the map. Follow that question, and you'll begin to see the invisible wires. You'll notice how guilt is often disguised as love, as concern, as family. A parent says, I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? Translation: obey me or feel the burn of betrayal. A partner says, you used to make time for me, you've changed. Translation: dare to evolve, and I'll make you pay for it emotionally. An employer says, we're a team, you should have been more available. Translation: your boundaries threaten our control over you, and just like that, you begin to fold. You think you're the problem. You start rewriting your history to fit their narrative. You walk back into the trap willingly, believing it's the right thing to do, but Machiavelli would never call that righteousness. He would call it what it is: psychological manipulation. He understood that morality, when placed in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon not to elevate, but to subjugate, because when guilt is engineered, it doesn't come from your soul, it comes from someone else's agenda. This is how they tame you. They don't need to raise their voice, they don't need to threaten you, they just tighten the leash and whisper about how disappointed they are, and you become your own warden. You build the cage, you lock the door, and you apologize not for what you did, but for who you dared to become. That's the most dangerous kind of guilt, not the one tied to an action, but the one tied to your existence. You begin to feel guilty for choosing peace, guilty for evolving, guilty for succeeding, guilty for saying no. They trained you to believe that self-respect was selfishness, that self-preservation was betrayal, that setting fire to the old version of you was a crime against the people who kept you small, and so you apologize not to repair, but to shrink. That's not accountability, that's self-erasure. But here's the turn: guilt, when seen clearly, becomes your weapon, not your cage, because once you stop assuming guilt is truth, you begin to interrogate it. You ask, does this guilt come from my values or from someone else's expectations? Is this guilt a sign I've done wrong, or that I've stepped outside someone's control? And suddenly, the leash snaps, because guilt can only dominate you in the dark. Once you bring it into the light, once you name it, question it, examine it, you regain choice. Machiavelli never bowed to emotion without purpose. He believed even virtue should be used strategically. He would say, guilt is not something to carry, it's something to study, and then, if useful, to reflect outward. Because once you see how guilt controls you, you begin to understand how to wield it. You recognize it in others, you spot their patterns, you use it not to destroy them, but to disarm their ability to manipulate you, and when necessary, you plant the right words, the right silences, the right pauses, to make them question themselves. It's not about cruelty, it's about equilibrium. Stop being the one owned by guilt and start becoming the one immune to it. That's when power returns. But this transformation requires exile. You must walk away from the emotional systems that trained you to apologize for existing. You must burn the scripts that told you it was virtuous to suffer in silence. You do not need to explain your freedom. You do not need to soften your boundaries. You do not need to feel guilty for choosing to reclaim yourself. And most of all, you do not owe anyone an apology for refusing to carry guilt that does not belong to you. Law is this: guilt is a tool. Use it wisely, but never, ever let it sink into your bones. You no longer apologize to the person you hurt. You apologize to the crowd, 1,000 strangers, faces you'll never see, voices you'll never meet, judges without names. They demand repentance, not because they care about truth, but because your submission makes them feel powerful. Welcome to the apology economy. A marketplace built not on healing but humiliation, where guilt is the product, and your self-abasement is the price of re-entry into the tribe. You don't confess because you're sorry. You confess to survive, and the currency they want from you, not change, not justice. They want your compliance, because in this new world, you can be punished not for harm, but for perception, not for truth, but for how others feel about your shadow. You can wrong no one in particular, and still be forced to kneel before everyone, and the ritual is always the same. Exposure public. Shame, apology, reintegration, like a sinner confessing before the church, like a prisoner begging the king. But Machiavelli would scoff at this game. He would not kneel. He would not beg. He understood something that modern society has forgotten. It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. And it is not virtue that grants power, but power that grants the illusion of virtue. To Machiavelli, the crowd was never the compass, only control was. He would have watched today's forced confessions with cold amusement, because he knew the crowd never forgives. They move on. They don't want remorse. They want ritual. They want the fire, and you on your knees inside it. What we call empathy now is often nothing more than social pressure dressed in softness. It doesn't comfort, it compels, it manipulates, it extracts you. Expected to perform grief on cue, to weep at the right volume, to carry visible shame. So they know you're still obedient, but this isn't virtue, it's theater, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Think of how quickly the mob moves. A screenshot, a clip without context, a whisper, an accusation, a headline. And before you can blink, you're on trial, not in court, but in the open square, where truth doesn't matter, only the optics of guilt and what's demanded of you. Not clarity, not an explanation, but an apology. One that follows the script, the proper tone, the right posture, performative repentance. Step out of line, and the punishment deepens. Stay silent. You're defiant, speak carefully. You're manipulating, say too little. You're evasive, say too much. You're weak. It's not about accountability, it's about domination. You either bow properly or you burn. Publicly, Machiavelli never asked to be understood, only to be obeyed. He would see today's apology rituals as nothing more than emotional taxation, the price of existing in a digital arena, ruled by invisible tyrants. Because when apology becomes expected, it loses all weight when remorse is demanded. It becomes meaningless when you apologize, not because you're wrong, but because silence has become too dangerous. You've entered a game where every move is loss. This is how empathy has been corrupted. What once was connection has become a lever, a tool for control, a mechanism of fear. They will tell you, if you were truly sorry, you would show it. But what they mean is, if you truly belong to us, you will perform it. It's not enough to feel regret. You must display it. Feed it to the crowd like bread at a festival. And what do you gain in return? Temporary forgiveness, conditional silence, the right to speak again. If you never cross them the same way twice, this is not forgiveness, this is surveillance. And in this machine, the crowd becomes both priest and prison guard. But the moment you see this game for what it is, you realize the most dangerous thing you can do is refuse to play. Withdraw. Reposition. Go silent, not because you're guilty, but because you won't. Let strangers decide your worth. Machiavelli would call this the return to sovereign power. He would remind you, the prince rules not by begging the approval of the people, but by being beyond their reach. So let the mobs demand your apology. Let them cry for confession. Let them write your script and expect you to perform it. You will not, because your soul is not for public consumption. Your mistakes are not communal property. Your silence is not weakness. It is refusal to make your pain a performance. Refusal to prove your humanity to those who never looked for it. When Machiavelli wrote about power, he wrote with the understanding that the crowd is never loyal, only your strategy is, and here is your strategy. Do not apologize just because they demand it. Do not confess just to be accepted. Do not explain yourself to people who would never listen, because once you give them that piece of yourself, they will take the rest. They do not want your change. They want your obedience and you. You've outgrown the need to be ruled, so step off the stage, let the spotlight swing wildly. Let the crowd search for its next offering. You are no longer for sale. Your guilt is no longer currency. Your silence is no longer submission. It is sovereignty. The law is this: never let a system of approval decide the shape of your remorse, and never trade your crown for a moment of applause. They told you that honesty is strength, that confession brings connection, that to be vulnerable is to be real, and to be real is to be free. But what they never told you is this: every time you confess, you hand someone a blueprint, not of your house, but of your walls, your weaknesses, your doubts, your soft spots. And once they know where the cracks are, they know how to break you. This is the truth no one wants to hear. Confession is not always liberation. Sometimes it's a trap, a velvet chair beneath a noose, a candlelit room where the rope is tied with your own hands, because the moment you say, "Here is my shame, here is my fear, here is where I ache," you give them the coordinates to your destruction. Machiavelli wrote, "A man who lets himself be known is already conquered." He understood something that modern society has forgotten. Mystery protects, clarity exposes, and in the war of influence, to be exposed is to be at the mercy of those who gather secrets, not to protect you, but to possess you. We live in an age of overexposure, where radical honesty is sold as empowerment, where people strip their souls bare in public, believing that if they show everything, they can never be held hostage. But the opposite is true. The more they know, the more ways they have to shape you, to provoke you, to manipulate the very emotions you revealed. You think you're building trust, but you're just placing your sword on the table and walking away. What you see as openness, others see as leverage. This is why the strongest leaders, the coldest kings, rarely reveal what they feel, not because they lack emotion, but because they refuse to turn their fire into currency for others to spend. And this doesn't only apply to enemies. It applies to those closest to you, lovers, friends, family. Some will comfort your confession only so they can control it later. They will hold your secrets gently until they need to win, and when the fight comes, they know exactly where to strike. Didn't you say you were afraid of being abandoned? Didn't you admit you always self-sabotage? Didn't you tell me about that thing you did? That moment you regret? Yes, you did, and now it's theirs. This is the Machiavellian warning. To reveal your inner world is not always an act of intimacy. Sometimes it's an act of surrender. The world has taught you to confuse emotional expression with emotional intelligence, but Machiavelli would never confuse the two. He believed emotions should be studied, not spilled, observed, not offered, controlled, not confessed. And here's why. Because once you become readable, you become predictable. And once you are predictable, you become controllable in the economy of power. The most valuable person in the room is not the most open, but the least decipherable. The one who listens, calculates, withholds. The one whose silence makes others nervous because they can't see what moves behind the curtain. This is not about being cold. This is about being sovereign to protect your emotional data like a kingdom. Protect its maps. Let them think you're transparent. Let them guess, but never confirm. Never reveal the full truth of your fears, your shame, your past, because truth in the wrong hands becomes a trap and every confession becomes a key. Look around. The ones who rise don't overshare. They hint, they misdirect. They speak in shadows. Their past is a fog. Their emotions mirrors. They give enough to appear human, but never enough to be held by it, because they understand the law. Visibility is vulnerability. What is unseen cannot be wounded. What is silent cannot be twisted. What is withheld cannot be used. The problem is, you were raised in an emotional empire that glorified disclosure. They told you to own your truth, to speak your story, to say how you feel, and in doing so, they taught you to bleed on command. But bleeding is not bravery. When the crowd is taking notes, Machiavelli would watch this and ask, "What are you getting in return?" That's the question that breaks the spell. What does your confession buy you? A moment of relief? A little pity? Temporary connection? And what does it cost? Your privacy, your power, your positioning in war. No general reveals his next move in politics. No ruler exposes his uncertainty, and in strategy, no one survives by handing the enemy their own map. So why should you? The principle is simple. Share nothing you are not prepared to see turned against you. Speak what is useful. Hide what is sacred. Your emotions are not offerings. They are intelligence data weaponry. Let them stay locked behind your walls, not because you're hiding, but because you're protecting the most valuable thing you have. Your mind's interior terrain. Let others confess. Let them cry into open spaces. Let them spill their secrets to strangers dressed as friends. You keep your world behind glass. Let them see the reflection, but never the source. Because mystery is not isolation, it's protection, and silence is not absence, it's dominance. The law is this: never give away what they cannot take, and never confess what you might one day need to survive. You were told to be relatable, to be real, to be open, vulnerable, emotionally available. But there's a cost to being fully seen, and that cost is power. The more visible you become, the more common you become. The more you explain, the less they wonder. And the less they wonder, the less they respect. Machiavelli understood this deeply. To him, the ruler must never be fully known, because what is known can be touched, and what can be touched can be controlled. A prince, he wrote, should be feared more for what he hides than for what he reveals. To rule without resistance, the prince must become myth, not flesh, not flaw. Myth. That myth begins with the mask, not a lie, a choice, a veil of selective visibility, a silence that suggests meaning without exposing it, because when they can't read your face, they invent a story, and in that story, you become larger than you are, not because you said more, but because you revealed less. This is the paradox. In emotional distance, you are not diminished, you are elevated. Your silence becomes firelight. Behind the curtain, your presence becomes rare, your absence sacred like royalty. Seated above the crowd, not because you are better, but because you refuse to be common. The throne is not just a seat. It is a symbol. It stands higher than the people for a reason, not to oppress, but to redefine the dynamic. You were not meant to kneel among them. You were meant to stand apart, watchful, controlled, unreachable. Today, the world wants access. They want the illusion of closeness. They demand your inner world, your thoughts, your scars, your grief, your joy. They want to consume you piece by piece, and every time you give in, you dissolve just a little more. But when you pull back, when you retreat into shadow, they begin to respect the shape of your silence. They understand, this is not someone I can own. This is not someone I can predict. This is someone who chooses when to be seen. That choice is the crown, because your distance is not rejection. It is design and your mask. It is not deception. It is strategy. Let others overshare. Let them become entirely available. Let them drown in the illusion that connection equals control. You will not be so cheap. Your mystery is not coldness. It is the signal that you are not one of them. Not entirely, and that signal commands reverence. The law is this: withdraw, veil, elevate. The less they see, the more they believe. This is not a sermon against apology. This is not a manifesto of pride. This is strategy. Machiavelli was no fool. He never dismissed the power of an apology. He simply refused to waste it on him. Remorse was not a feeling, it was a move, a cold calculation. Wrapped in warmth, not to heal, but to influence, because when used with precision, an apology becomes a weapon, not a sponge that absorbs guilt, but a scalpel clean, sharp, deliberate, and when wielded properly, it does not diminish you, it elevates you. A king does not apologize for existing, but he may kneel once to stabilize the realm. A general does not confess his flaws, but he may shoulder blame if it disarms rebellion. A strategist does not show remorse for approval. He shows it when the act of saying sorry puts him 2 moves ahead. This is the difference. Most people apologize to relieve pressure, to be liked again, to soften the atmosphere, but Machiavelli would say, why relieve pressure that benefits you? Sometimes tension is leverage. Sometimes discomfort makes them listen more closely. Sometimes your silence says more than an apology ever could. But there are rare moments, critical moments, when the apology is not surrender. It is power projection. Imagine a CEO under fire. The company's image is collapsing. He steps forward, calm, controlled. He takes responsibility, not out of guilt, but to control the story. The public sees humility, but behind the curtain, he's consolidating loyalty, turning a scandal into a spectacle of strength. Now, imagine a king. His people whisper rebellion. He addresses the nation. I was wrong to overlook your suffering. I will not make that mistake again. They cheer not because he lowered himself, but because he chose when and how to descend. A true apology is rare, and when rare, it becomes sacred. It signals control. It signals awareness. It signals that you are above emotion, and therefore capable of wielding it tactically. It must be cold, precise, surgical, no rambling, no bleeding, no trembling. Your words must cut, not drip. I misjudged. It won't happen again. That's it. Clarity without collapse, because if you weep when you should whisper, they'll smell the blood, they'll feed on it. But when you hold your crown and admit fault, you become untouchable. This is the psychology of power. They respect the one who chooses to bow, not the one who needs torso. If you must apologize, Make it rare, make it real, make it useful. Let it disarm without disrobing. Let it bring peace without inviting pity. Let it restore order without surrendering your throne. And when it's done, withdraw. Don't explain further, don't beg. Let the silence follow your words like an exhale after fire. Machiavelli never asked to be forgiven. He shaped perception, then moved on. That is the lesson. The law is this: apologize not to be accepted, but to extend your reach, not with emotion, with precision. This is your turn in the mirror. You've been trained to speak for peace, but Machiavelli would ask, and what did peace cost you? It cost your fire, your mystery, your leverage. Now you reclaim it. You remove sorry from your reflex vocabulary. You choose silence. You wear your mask. You apologize not because you must, but because it sharpens your image. When you don't let others dance for forgiveness, let them kneel at the altar of approval. You become unreadable. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them fear what you'll do next. Machiavelli would say, now they know not to cross you. Reposition. Reframe, withdraw. That's the game now.